10 best ways to learn a language. Let's get into it. Method number 1, which is by far the best method, is to combine all the other methods on this list. So make sure to pay attention and follow until the end of the video, and you might learn a better way to do your studies. Number 2, naturally, is immersion. Nobody should be surprised by this if you're used to seeing any of my other videos. Yeet the mother tongue and observe the world around you by paying attention to videos, movies, music, conversations that people are having that you can see in your everyday life. This is how you learned your mother tongue. It's also how you're going to learn any other language. Number 3, find native speakers to practice with and to speak with and to ask questions, potentially. Remember that more often than not, native speakers are not qualified to answer grammatical questions. But this is also a part of how you learned your mother tongue. You spoke with native speakers. And when you were a child, that included your parents' friends, and maybe even friends of your own as you grew older and you started being able to use the language yourself. Same dynamic when you're learning a different language. Find native speakers to practice with and learn how they communicate so that you can communicate more efficiently and with more confidence. Number 4, find other learners. You did the same thing with your mother tongue. Again, among your peers, you practice English or whatever your mother tongue was when you were a child. You practice that with your friends. Both of you would probably be incorrect, or if you had more than one friend, all of you would probably be incorrect, and the teacher would correct you from time to time. Your parents would correct you from time to time. Their parents would correct you from time to time, etc., etc. But being able to communicate with peers at your level, people who are also learning, is a wonderful way to practice and to learn language. Make mistakes together, grow together. It's a really good community. That's one of the best ways to integrate language into your life and to just become better at the language you're learning in general. Number 5, classrooms. Again, being able to have access to a teacher, someone who's qualified to answer your questions. Again, native speakers are not usually qualified to answer questions about grammar, but a teacher is. And teachers more often than not have training to help people who do not know how to speak the language they're trying to learn, more often than not. Some teachers are incompetent, some aren't. Take it with a grain of salt, do your research, be careful not to get a teacher that's incompetent. I have a video on here which tells you how to determine if your professor, teacher, etc. is going to be wasting your time. If you're on YouTube, you can watch that video here. If you're not on YouTube, it's somewhere in the videos I have posted on TikTok. But assuming your professor is competent and knows what they're talking about, it's a really good way to get feedback, to get proper corrections on your grammar, your pronunciation, etc., etc. Number 6, self-instruction. This is part of the way that you learned your mother tongue. You, in some ways, had to teach yourself how to communicate. Nobody can learn for you. And there's only so much that a teacher, a parent, or somebody else can do for you without you having to put in the work as well. Just a bit of caution, however, I don't recommend learning your first language via self-instruction. It's quite a bit of a learning curve. It's going to be quite a challenge, especially if the language is drastically different from your mother tongue. I'll make a video about how to decide how different a language is versus how similar, the challenge, the barriers, etc. in a future video. But if you've learned a language besides your mother tongue and you know what it's like to learn a language, self-instruction is such a rewarding practice. And it is the way that I have taught myself how to speak several of the languages that I know. I highly recommend it if you're up for the challenge. Number 7, study abroad is a wonderful way to learn another language. This one is a bit of a financial investment, or if not financial investment, you have to write different essays to get scholarships and grants and fellowships and all that nonsense. If you're in the US particularly, the education is, but it's kind of subpar in some ways regarding finances and accessibility. It's a thing. Anyway, if you can go abroad, good for you, do it. It's a fantastic way to get exposure to the language in a way that is intense, but not as intense as throwing yourself to the wolves and traveling there by yourself via plane. But speaking of which, number 8 is orchestrating a way to travel entirely on your own. Yes, not via study abroad, via saving up the money, scheduling the trip, scheduling the hotel or youth hostel, etc., etc. And this is literally like throwing yourself to the wolves. But this only works to learn a language if you do not speak your mother tongue and you pretend basically like you don't know your mother tongue while you're there. Because if you're just going to practice your mother tongue, the only thing traveling is going to do is give you an experience of traveling. Number 9, language learning apps. plural. Duolingo by itself, Memrise by itself, italki by itself, etc., are not going to gain you high levels of fluency. It's just not going to happen. That's not how you learned your mother tongue. You didn't learn how to speak the language that you grew up speaking just by being on apps constantly. It's not how you learned. Duolingo is really good for keeping you motivated because a lot of it feels like playing a game. It's really good for teaching you little quirky sentences here and there that you can throw around for fun, some of which are more functional than others. Memrise is good at teaching you different mnemonics to remember things. Memrise is good at teaching you different ways to study little tidbits of language without it being overwhelming. italki is really good at practicing with native speakers and talking to people who can answer questions. It's kind of like finding a way to get a teacher in addition to sort of having like this game dynamic as well as a pen pal to speak to. So that is more versatile, but even that by itself will not gain you to fluency. Using apps alongside other methods, including alongside other apps, is a type of method, hybrid method, that can gain you to fluency over time. But right away, no. Again, you did not learn your mother tongue via apps. You can kind of debate that to an extent because maybe you grew up watching movies on an app. Maybe you grew up watching TV shows on an app, YouTube videos, etc. That's a way to expose yourself to language, but that's immersion. That's not depending on an app itself. That's depending on immersive materials that are within an app. And lastly, number 10, and there's a reason I put this last, textbooks. Textbooks will teach you grammar. They'll teach you things that are practical, functional. Some of it's going to be potentially obsolete, stuffy, formal, etc. It's really good to take things in a textbook with a grain of salt. But for things that are supposed to be black and white, it is what it is, strict, rigid, etc., such as grammar, to follow it to a T, textbooks are really good for that. And I've noticed that people who do not use textbooks at all tend to struggle with using proper grammar. And even if they've learned grammatical patterns, they're inconsistent. And it's only a matter of time before they slip up and their grammar is... But there are many things that are more important than grammar and speaking 100% correctly according to grammarians and prescriptivists, which is why this is number 10 on the list. And there you have it. The 10 best ways to learn a language. I hope that you use number 1, which is a combination of all the others, because that is the most effective and is literally how you learned your mother tongue. And you're watching this video, so I understand that you understand English. It is how you learned English, if that is not your mother tongue. But if some of these methods are not accessible to you, like traveling, for example, I do not come from a background of wealth. Traveling is not something I've had much opportunity to do, and it has not really been outside of my country when I have been able to travel. That's fine. You can learn a language without traveling. And most of the time, people who travel and try to learn languages just via traveling just travel for the sake of travel and don't actually learn a language when they are abroad. So let me know if you have any specific questions and I'll be happy to answer them. Consider subscribing if you're on YouTube or following on TikTok if you want more videos that tell you how to effectively learn language, as well as discussing the quirks of different languages and ways to just improve how we communicate as a species. If you want me to walk you through how I learn a new language or how I would learn a new language if I were going to start one soon, let me know in the comments. I have no problem making a video like that. It would be on the longer side, just a heads up, because I'd have to basically formulate a lesson plan and give you a how-to sort of DIY step-by-step with instructions of how to learn a language if you're just starting from ground zero. But until next time, friends, happy language learning.